Hello, good evening. Welcome to The Late Show. Tonight I have a very special guest. We go back a long way, so I'm really praying and hoping that you're going to be blessed tonight, because there's so much in this man that he knows. His knowledge is incredible, biblical knowledge in the past and the present, and hopefully a little bit into the future. Ron Matsen.
Well, thank you, Howard. It's a great pleasure to be here.
After all these years.
You say it like we're old men.
Yeah, I think we're getting on a bit. Me a little bit more than you, Ron.
Yeah.
But you know, just to give a little bit of your history. I mean, you've worked with Chuck Missler. Give us some of that background and why you're here tonight and what you want to share. What's on your heart?
Right. Well, Howard, we actually met at a Christian resource exhibition here in London, and you were looking for somebody to get Chuck Missler's material on Revelation TV at that time. And I happened to be behind you getting a coffee, and we started a conversation. And that really started a relationship from about 2005, 6 or so onward. And interestingly enough, and I want to give credit where credit's due, the ministry of Chuck Missler is all over the world, but this was the first place where the videos were put on television. And it was because of your encouragement and the opportunity that you gave us to do that, and that opened up, of course, a whole new vein of ministry and media platform opportunity. But then we carried on. There was 2 years during that time where I did a live Bible study on Revelation TV.
Friday nights?
Friday nights, yeah, Friday nights. And
your two sons at that time also came and helped. We had a night off, and we left you in the studio, and we went out and had something to eat and came back, and you did everything. Your boys.
That's right. You had a lot of faith in us back then.
But, I had to. I needed to eat on a Friday.
Exactly.
No, it was good.
No, it was a great pleasure. And so since we lived 21 years here in England, and eventually we went down in 2011 to join up full time with Chuck Missler in the latter part of his life. And my responsibility really was just to help carry the ministry forward. And I was given the opportunity to be both the CEO and president, with Chuck still alive, but hoping to not only take forward his ministry and the material that he had produced, but also take it into the next generation. So thus, after his passing in May of 2018, we began to explore not only expanding his material around the world, but also other teachings and other explorations. And one of them was certainly our expedition in 2020, February 2020, right before COVID shut us all down. I took a small team, myself and a man named Bob Cornuke, took 2 others with us, and we went on really more of an expedition to Saudi Arabia. And we did that primarily because in the previous years, we do a lot as a ministry, Cornuke House. We take a lot of people to Israel and show them the sites and so on and so forth, as so many do.
So the archaeological side is very important, as well as the biblical history, because that bears witness for validating the Bible, really.
Well, absolutely. In fact, we sort of have connected with a large number of very well-respected Israeli archaeologists, and so our tours generally were focused on the archaeological side, primarily because it shows just how accurate the Bible is historically. But while I was doing that, of course, you come across what they consider themselves to be scholars, and you'd ask them about, so how important is evidence for the Exodus? And from their perspective, of course, they're looking at the Sinai Peninsula, and there is no evidence in the Sinai Peninsula. Not even a shard of pottery is there. And it's a real problem for the scholar that would look at that. And so even the Orthodox Jew would tell you that it doesn't have evidence, but it's not important. They don't view the actual event as being needing any substance behind it. But it was people like, in 1984, Ron Wyatt was arrested in Saudi Arabia in an attempt to check out some of these sites that had previously been people made aware of. Then in 1988, Bob Cornuke and Larry Williams, under the guidance of the astronaut James Irwin, went back twice, snuck into Saudi Arabia, because back then it was illegal to go there.
So it's opened up, hasn't it? Which is great for people like yourself,
Yes.
who can actually go and see what evidence they can have for the Exodus, particularly.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Well, it all changed in September of 2019. And so when we heard that finally you could get a regular tourist visa, then we organized an expedition to go and not only see for ourselves, but I had a desire, not just simply having a site that was interesting, but I wanted to link it with the chronology of the biblical text. I want to say they crossed, they went 3 days, then they did this, then they did that. Is there a way to literally get in a SUV and drive that entire route? That was my objective, because most people in the last sort of 10 years have got in there and they describe routes and things, but they're not passable. Most of the routes aren't, the entire route is impassable. So I want to see that. You can have 1 million people, maybe 2 million people with their cattle and whatever. So I wanted to see we could do that. And that was really what we wanted to try out. And I think in the end, we found some challenges. We had to change some of our presuppositions. One thing I would say, having dealt a lot with card-carrying archaeologists, as you might say, is that a real archaeologist looks at the field of archaeology as it's always an element of speculation. When somebody says, we've found such and such, and there's no doubt, that's sort of
so supposition sometimes is the only thing you've got.
Right, and so there's going to be an element of uncertainty to it, and anyone that's worth their salt in the world of archaeology is going to say, yes, this is likely, but it's like a detective bringing evidence before a court.
Yes.
Everything is circumstantial evidence. We have no eyewitnesses of these events, and even if we did, that would not be as reliable as the hard evidence. And so I know you've had in the program here people like Andrew Jones and others who have presented pictures of these various sites. And so it was our intention to go and to look at them, to measure them and get a geotag so that literally somebody could just fly to Tabuk and take this map with them. And that's what we're providing, is basically a map to here's where everything is. Come to your own conclusions.
Right. Can I just set the stage a little bit? Because many people would actually say, well, Mount Sinai's in the Sinai Desert, which is obviously next to Egypt, you know. And when we look at that, we can see that it couldn't have been possible to actually, for 2 or 3 million people to have traveled through there. And you have to have wider landmass and openings, which led you probably, no doubt, to the places which some of the others that have been before you, taking you to Saudi Arabia, which has a lot more credibility than what we have assigned to, as it were, the Sinai Desert.
Sinai Peninsula, yes. But what's interesting about the Sinai Peninsula, just in simple, is it's never been Midian. You remember in Exodus chapter 3, God comes to Moses, who's in the land of Midian.
Yep.
And then he takes him on the backside of the desert where he's talking to God through this burning bush, and God says, you will bring the people back to Mount Horeb, the Mount of God, in Midian. Yeah. So
which is in Saudi Arabia.
Which is in Saudi Arabia. Yeah. When you travel to a place called Al-Bada, they call it Midian. The locals, they have no desire to validate a Jewish story of the Exodus.
None at all,
but
really.
But the village, when you go there, they refer to this region as Midian. But what's important to see is that the Sinai Peninsula itself, there were copper and turquoise mines there from 2000 BC, all throughout, and also military establishments. So when it says, I'm going to take you out of Egypt, that means God's going to take them out of Egypt, which was the Sinai Peninsula. Until 106 AD, it was still Egypt, until the Romans annexed it in 106 AD.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay. So it's interesting it's gone back to Egypt then.
Yeah, it's
in that sense.
In 106 AD is when the Romans annex it, and at that time Egypt is not a factor, and then it goes through that passing on of it being a vassal state in that sense, but not important because there's nothing economically important about what we call the Sinai Peninsula.
Yep.
But we know that it was named that because of Queen Helena, who had a vision. She went around Israel and the Sinai Peninsula, and she would have visions, and she said, this happens here, and they'd build a church there, and thus that was the 1500 years worth of tradition that we have. And St. Catherine's Monastery is a part way up the mountain, and that's all as a result of that declaration that she would make, and then the church would then take it and calcify it, literally.
I was going to say, almost, but when it really had no place to be there, in that sense.
No, and so there was no evidence. Even when Israel, after the 6-Day War, had the Sinai Peninsula, their archaeologists ran in there, and they couldn't find a shard of pottery. You know, one of the cute things that archaeologists say about their own trade is it's the study of durable garbage. And that's really what you're doing.
Yeah.
You're coming to some place, you can't have 1 million or 2 million people living somewhere for almost a year.
Without leaving a trace.
Correct.
Yeah.
And there is not a trace of anything there.
Yeah.
So that was very key.
Right. So let me get to the point when you actually are saying, you know, why is the Exodus important for Israel today? That's an interesting point. Why?
Well, it's very important, and I'll put it in the context of a parallel. To the Christian, the literal life, ministry, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ is the foundation upon which our faith is based.
Amen.
If he was a fictional character, or as Paul says in Corinthians, he's not raised from the dead, then we are above most men miserable.
Absolutely, yes.
So it's the foundation. Well, the salvation experience for the Jew is the Exodus. The Psalms are replete with constant references to this event whereby the children of Israel are rescued from Egypt. They are taken to the foot of Mount Sinai, where they are commissioned as a nation. Before Mount Sinai, they were just the children of Israel. At the base of Mount Sinai is when they become a nation. They're given the laws, of course, and they're also given their commission to go into the promised land and to occupy that in fulfillment of the promise that was given to Abraham. So it really is, it would be like Christians saying today, it doesn't matter if Jesus is only a myth, or it doesn't matter if there's no evidence of the crucifixion and resurrection, just be a good person. And that's unfortunately what you have even within Orthodox Judaism that denies the fact that they have evidence for their Exodus.
Right. So we've got hopefully some PowerPoints. We didn't really have a lot of time to set up properly, but we will make the best of what we've got. Is there anything that you want to go to first? Because obviously we just had about half an hour before the program to do this. Sounds typical Revelation.
Hey, this is Revelation.
TV.
This is live TV at Revelation TV, right?
Yeah, on the fly, on the foot.
Right, right. Well, yes, you know, of course, the key point for most people is the crossing of the Red Sea. And in the back of all of our Bibles, of course, is this map with all these confusing lines around them, many places with question marks. And in fact, I normally start a presentation by asking people to raise their hand. How many of you believe everything in your Bible? And of course, the real devotees will all raise their hand. And then I put this slide up of the back of my Bible, which is a map. And I said, how many of you believe that? And all of a sudden, there's that nervous laughter in the room because they're all the major sites, if you're honest, should have a question mark behind it. Because there isn't information for Mara, the Bitter Springs, or Elam, or even Mount Sinai. And so that's sort of the thing that we sort of bait them to admit. So that allows us then to go and talk about the crossing. Of course, Ron Wyatt was his conjecture, and I use that term not as a derogatory thing. I've learned this from my archaeological friends, is that everything is a conjecture because tomorrow somebody may upturn something else that then resets our understanding. So you don't want to marry a particular conclusion. So Ron Wyatt came up with the idea of crossing at Nuweiba. That's the many people are very taken on that, and he would say that in going there, the proof was he found encrusted chariot wheels and a land bridge.
And a large landmass for millions of people to actually come to a place where they could cross.
Right,
and there's lots of other interesting things about that crossing.
But when you actually look, and he published a little diagram, sort of a stick diagram of that land bridge there. And one of the things that I did when I went over there was I was on the Saudi side of it, and I went to a dive shop, and said, what does the actual what is this actually? What's actually underneath there? What can I prove is there? What's what we're looking for? Let's just prove this. And of course, what we found very quickly was that actually it goes down to more than 800 meters. That's a quarter. That's a half a mile down. It's not as was previously announced, the sort of 100-meter under the water bridge that nicely goes across. But more importantly, as you look at that, and I don't want to spend a lot of time as a detractor, is that a few things that are important in all archaeology, not just here.
Which is?
They need independent verification. If you say you have something, you need to be able to show. And
other people need to know.
Other people need to test it.
And have proved it as well.
Some of the artifacts that he made reference to, the golden chariot wheel and whatever, of course, no one's been able to corroborate that because no one else can find it, which is strange to do when you consider it. Plus, if you go down, you recognize that area of Nuweiba is what's called an alluvial fan. And what that means is that it's an area that is constantly being built out.
Yes, right.
Right?
Yep.
Constantly being built out. In fact, it's an area that covers about 3,400 square kilometers of catchment area.
Right.
All right.
So that's coming down from
the mountains,
Sinai Desert, as it were, really.
And so it's almost 3,400 square kilometers worth of catchment, and it all funnels down to this little one wadi called Wadi Watir, and that flows out. And if you actually look at that picture of the Nuweiba, you'll notice that they now have created dams so that when the water and flash floods, which by the way happen generally once a year at least.
Okay. But you've also got earthquake movements in that period as well.
And so it is hard to look at that place today and understand what it could have looked like 3,500 years ago.
Right.
And truly, if there was something that was going to be buried, it'd be buried by the onward flow of the sand. The second thing is...
That's what the
alluvial fan is. It's just a constant
alluvial
growing...
sand almost,
yes, absolutely right. Now, another thing that was a problem with that, of course, is the fact that... now, I know you don't have sandy beaches here in England, but you do in Spain.
Okay.
And if you walk out into the water and you stand in loose sand, what happens to your feet?
Yeah, they sink.
They disappear.
Yeah.
All right. That's called liquefaction. So if anything heavy lays on the sand, it doesn't sit there for 3,500 years. It sinks into the sand. Right. It just disappears. Okay. So when there's shipwrecks and everything else, things fall overboard, they sink into the sand. So it was a result of that the astronaut James Irwin, having seen the what was being said about the traditional Mount Sinai, they examined the Nuweiba site and saw scientifically it doesn't actually work. You can show some pictures, but can anybody validate that? And so he sort of charged two of the people that were close to him, Bob Cornuke and Larry Williams, to go into Saudi Arabia and determine something different. And so they have a different crossing point. It's down in Sharm el-Sheikh.
As far down as that?
Yeah, well, it's just the Straits of Tiran. In fact, if you go down to the Straits of Tiran, there is, in fact, a coral bridge that covers and divers today. And you can literally, at low tide, you can stand on the coral. And coral won't grow on anything deeper than 200 meters. So you know that the bedrock underneath all of that is 200 meters or less. And there's only a small area that gets very deep, but it doesn't mean that that can't be eroded away like the Grand Canyon. But anyway, so that was the choice that that Cornuke and James Irwin did, and it was there that we started our trip. We started and said, well, the scripture says that once they came across, they drove 3 days into the wilderness and they found no water. They just found this bitter springs. Well, this is hundreds and hundreds of square acres of desert, but underneath it's an aquifer that comes down from the mountains and mixes in with the salt water and all the water there. And we have videos, which we won't show now, but we have videos and pictures of these little dry lake beds that are there.
Right.
And
are we talking in Saudi Arabia?
In Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
Now we're in Saudi Arabia. We've crossed over at Sharm el Sheikh, and we're in Saudi Arabia, the southern tip. Today, they actually call that Neom, and they're going to develop into a tourist site.
It looks phenomenal.
It's incredible. You want to buy? You want to buy a
no, I haven't got any money now. I put it into what we do rather than what
exactly.
Can be, yeah.
So then from there, they go and fight Elam. If you just go up the coast about 30 kilometers, you come to a village called El Makna. They have natural sweet water. They have palm trees. And of course, one thing we need to appreciate in the whole of the Middle East, that what we see today did not necessarily exist at this level of dryness even 2,000 years ago. We know that from what the scripture describes of Israel. Trees and forests and cedars and everything else. You go to Israel today, and the nation of Israel is struggling to try to get that vegetation back. So, point is, it's a logical place. From there, you can go inland in what's called the pathway. Is called the wilderness of Sin. And you end up at Rephidim, which means resting place. And of course there, Jim and Penny Caldwell in the 90s discovered this thing called the Split Rock.
Yes.
And
it's huge.
Massive. And,
I mean, a person this big and the rock is this big.
We've done videos of Bob and I sitting inside of it. And it matches very well. Now at this point, I'm going to pause for a moment, see if they can even play the video. And certainly that's us inside of the little cleft of the rock. It's a fascinating place, and but other people have seen that. The Caldwells saw that. The Ron Wyatt didn't see it. Bob Cornuke didn't see it. But the Caldwells, who spent 7 years going back and forth to that area, they discovered it, along with other things. One of the things I did when I was there was I was fascinated with, does this line up with anything?
Yeah.
So I took a geotag of that split rock, and I'm going to...
We haven't got the video for that, but I can paste it in afterwards when we do the program gets repeated.
Okay.
Yeah. Plus, also I'd say, Ron, that you've actually got a whole website and everything, and a whole plethora of videos to back up everything that you've been doing. And that your website again is
the letter K followed by house, one word, khouse.org. And in fact, I'm here because I'm doing 2 conferences where we'll spend the entire day going through the material. It's 2 1.5-hour presentations. And if anybody wants to attend it, if they just simply go to khouse.org, they click register at one of those 2 sites. One's going to be in Bath. That's where I drove up from tonight. The other's in Maidstone. That's not very far from here. And it's a Saturday and a Sunday, and it'll be it's kind of a half-a-day event, and I'll have all the material. But what's interesting about this split rock is that if you take a longitudinal tag, and I had a Garmin with me, so I get it right down to the meter. And it's 35 degrees, 14 minutes, 10.51 seconds. I then said, where does this, so I go up true north.
Yes.
And of course it takes me, and it's to Jerusalem, but not just anywhere in Jerusalem. It actually passes a very interesting site where a friend of mine named Eli Shukran contacted Bob Cornuke, myself, and Chuck Missler to come to see a new discovery in the city of David in 2014, so 10 years ago, a little more than 10 years ago. And while we were there, he was showing us a site that was a puzzle to them, because in the site is a Jewish pillar. A pillar is a flat stone stood on its end with no inscription and not hewn, it's natural. And it was buried on the eastern side of the city of David. And as they began to very carefully uncover that, they found an altar complex in the bedrock. And of course, in looking at it, it dates back to the time of Melchizedek. So we refer to that area.
Yes.
Tourists can't go there yet, but we did because of our relationship with the archaeologist there. But what's interesting is without telling Ellie anything, I said, because a real archaeologist will take a geotag on everything they find. Mm-hmm. And I said, what's the longitude of this stele, this mm-hmm. thing? And it is 35 degrees, 14 minutes, 51 seconds. Which lines up that pillar, mm-hmm. which is there.
With the split rock?
With the split rock.
My goodness.
To the foot.
No.
Yeah. Absolutely. And then you go about sort of 30 kilometers north, you do the same take, mm-hmm. and it takes you to the eastern side of Bethel. What takes place there? On the eastern side of Bethel, that's where Abraham comes down.
Yeah, on his way to
Genesis, comes down on his way to Israel. Genesis 12, God makes the covenant with him. He says he sets up a stone, pours oil on it, commemorating the promise God made to him. That's where Jacob goes, and so on and so forth.
But that's in the south of
That's
Jerusalem.
in the north. That's north of Jerusalem. Bethel is north of.
Okay, thanks for reminding me.
Bethel is north, about 30 kilometers or so.
Right.
So the point is, you have a very interesting intersection to the foot between the split rock, this memorial stone in Jerusalem mm-hmm. that was most likely set up by Melchizedek, and the eastern side of Bethel, just north of Jerusalem, all on exactly within a meter of one another. And that's an incredible sort of discovery that you make.
Yeah. Well, some people, critics would say that's just coincidental,
Well, it'd be coincidental, I think, if there would be some kind of connection. But God does things. I'll tell you what. When I explained this to my archaeology friends in Israel, they don't normally react in a positive fashion. Normally, the default mode of an archaeologist is to always say, "Oh, I don't really know about that," because they don't want to lend their credibility to what you're saying.
Good point. Yeah.
And so, as soon as I explained this to the man who is the director of archaeology for the Hebrew University, all right, he's a good friend of mine, and I explained to that, and he looked at me, and he said, "That's incredible. You need to write a white paper about this because that is something that we've never seen before, anything quite like that type of alignment." Right. But that's just the sense of that to the split rock. Now you go around that, and again, you've heard things from Andrew Jones and others who've done some great work there. You go down to what's called the area of what they call a holy precinct before the blackened mountain and the pictures of the blackened mountain. Yeah. And I've even brought a rock sample here that is what that is. This is basalt, actually, and it is.
What is basalt?
Basalt is a volcanic rock.
Okay. Yeah.
And
that's from Mount Sinai.
It is what I consider
one in Saudi Arabia.
It's this, and we also have it in granite. So there's both granite and basalt rock, covered with this black. And initially,
if you hold it still, we might be able to get a close up. Just and hold it there. We'll see. Yeah. Pull it down a bit. There you go.
Down there it is. You can see the layers on it there. Whoop.
Now, on top of Mount Sinai, it has got that burnt look on the very top, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah. And that's what most people call it. They call it the burnt mountain. But in one of my Israel trips, I was showing that to a friend of mine who was a geologist. And he said, no, he says, if you burn either basalt or granite, it turns white. It doesn't turn black. So I can tell you what this is. And it's called desert varnish. Desert varnish is a very unusual thing. Nobody knows how it happens. It's all over the world, by the way. It's not just on top of this mountain.
Right.
But it's how the ancients were able to do petroglyphs. That's where you get these drawings on this dark rock.
Right, okay. Which you have many in Saudi Arabia.
You have loads of them.
Yeah, in the caves and everything,
Correct. And so nobody can quite figure out, because the thickness of this, you think about this rock sitting with sand blasting against it, you think it'd just go away. Especially then when you recognize and why is there, and yet they were able to put figures on it. Now, what's astonishing is to recognize that that the thickness of that covering, all right, is 1/1000th of a millimeter thick.
In general? I mean, because that looks a lot more than that.
Well, because it's wrapped around the rock. But
Okay.
the actual, if you cut this like
Right.
this, if you cut it and you looked at it, it's generally, now the stones that we brought down.
But so what's the significance of that?
Well, the significance could be this. We've sent 4 samples, blind tests off to labs, not telling them where we got it. And we're getting some very interesting results back. One is, there's no volcanic activity in this area at all. But yet what we find is, not only is this desert varnish there, but it's 4 to 6 times thicker. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but they've also tested the entire rock, both the basalt and the granite, and said the rock compositions of the rock themselves have been submitted to intense heat of a blast furnace. So that's even more provocative than the blackened top, is that we have.
Why do you think that's significant?
Well, I think it's significant because it shows that there was the presence of something there. The Bible tells us that God appeared in a cloud of fire.
Yeah.
Now, recognize that he also...
And there was a great thundering,
Correct,
lightning,
correct.
and
you know, is this a fingerprint of God? Again, it's supposition, but it is unique. But the thing that makes this site unique, of course, is at the base of the mountain there is this V-shaped altar, referred to as Moses' altar. Anyone can see it on Google Earth if they look at it. There is another large structure, 3 structures in fact, that have been constructed they're man-made. One is referred to as the place of the golden calf altar. That's there. Around that, of course, are these bovine characters that are etched in the desert varnish.
Yep.
And it's the only place in Saudi Arabia where they etch bovine characters. Is there, and it's the Egyptian Apis bull, which is honoring Osiris, which is the god of resurrection.
okay.
So you have clearly a cult site that is focused on the representation of Egyptian God.
The other thing I found fascinating there was that there is a huge area underneath that Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia where you could have 2 or 3 million people.
Oh, easy, yes.
Very
And
easy.
that was one of the, what we did was we wanted to go around and sort of dispel what could just simply be subjective kind of thinking and not objective thinking. And surely at the base of the mountain there is, not only what they call the precinct, but the outer area, there is more than enough room for 2 million people. Remembering that it doesn't have to be like a city, because the wadi that comes down from the mountain that flows down into that area would have had water because they were told to wash themselves. Number 2, they had food delivered to their door. You know, they didn't have to go out and forage around. It was literally delivered to their door.
You're talking about the manna.
The manna.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that started when they turned in from the Red Sea. After the Elam, they then went into the wilderness of sin, and that's the point at which this manna begins. That's where the Shabbat is instituted, by the way. It's not instituted by the law. It's instituted by the people learning to rest in God's provision. So they could have been very tightly packed because food was being delivered to them by God himself, along with their cattle and everything else. But of course, when they get involved in this idolatrous worship associated with the calf,
Yeah.
of course, Moses comes down and he calls the Levites together, and they go throughout the camp and they kill 3,000 men. Now,
And just remind our viewers why.
well, because in Exodus it says that they literally were naked. It was an orgy.
Okay.
And in fact, there's a stone. I don't know if we can show the stone of. There's petroglyphs, they're quite complicated petroglyphs, which has these bovine characters and also men dancing around in front of it. And most people sort of think it's over by the golden calf. It's not. It's sort of off by itself. And when you look at it in the context of the scripture, you realize that what was taking place there, the King James Version says it best, that they did not cover their nakedness. So there was an orgy of some kind going on, and you can speculate.
My goodness.
And
so there were several occasions like that throughout the Exodus where you had 24,000 lost their life in one day because they were coming against Moses.
That's right. Yeah, the rebellion of Korah. And then later
Korah,
on,
there you go.
When you have the
Let's have a look. I think we might have that picture you were just referring to.
Yes, there you go.
Yeah.
You can see the
nakedness.
And you can see the exaggerated...
yes, lower parts.
Lower parts, yes.
Yeah.
All right, you have to be over 18 to be able to see this. But and that was really the thing. But from there, according to Jewish practice, they have to take the dead and bury them outside the camp within 24 hours.
Yep.
That's practice within Israel today. And so if you go just about 5 miles north of there, and you go back into a box canyon, there's an 18-acre site that's chain linked off, and it's a burial site. And you see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these tombstones. And you know they're Jewish because they're not hand carved. They're all the random size, but they're put up on their edge. There you go. Put up on their edge, and they're all over this place here. And this gives you the sense of this would have been outside the camp of Israel. So it means the 2 million people going up the wadi would have been as much as stretching out maybe 5-10 miles in the various areas. But it's a large area.
Yeah, I mean, I'm maybe jumping ahead a little bit. I'm just inviting our viewers live at revelationtv.com. If you've got any questions, please do put them forward. But when you go due north from there, obviously Moses' father-in-law was there in Midian, you know?
Yes.
And there was a time, and I'm trying to think, you go absolutely due north, you come to the point where you know, the Israelites crossed over into the Promised Land.
Yes, across the Jordan River. Yes, yeah.
Or up to Moab, would it have been?
Moab.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then across. Well, that makes sense if you're in Saudi Arabia today.
You got it.
You're due north, okay?
Yeah.
So, and there was something, and I'm trying to remember what it was, but Moses' father-in-law, just remind me his name.
Jethro.
Jethro actually says something about, well, okay, I'm going back. And
right.
so he shows he's going back south to where he's from Midian. So they were due north at the time. They weren't in the Sinai. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, no, absolutely right.
The peninsula.
And in fact, you know, we've taken over 40 groups to Israel. Normally, up until this last war, we were taking 3 trips a year of people there. And one of the things that we wanted to do, we were going to do is, after we'd finished our October tour of last year, which we just got back in time to miss the October 7th, terrible thing. But the next trip was planned on doing a very exhaustive tour through Jordan. There are a lot of sites in Jordan. Yes, there's some typical sites, Nebo and so on and so forth, but recognizing that 38 years of the Exodus was spent in that area of Moab, what we know as the eastern shore, and in Jordan. And so there are some interesting sites there as you go all the way down to Petra that you can take and recognize. The Petra, of course, was
the big trade route.
Was the big trade route, right? And so the Nabateans, the height of their empire is at the same time as Solomon. And so you have that interplay. In fact, carries on until some of the Nabateans came up into Jerusalem to help defend it in 70 AD. So they were a fixture as an empire until after 70 AD. Then the Romans went down and just kind of took care of everybody
Right.
down and took the Sinai
So
Peninsula.
let me come back to the initial question. You know, why is the Exodus then important to Israel today? You know, given what's happening in the Middle East now as well, with everything since October the 7th last year, you know, what is it in this that is going to be important? Is it, what can the average viewer, you know, who watches perhaps TikTok rather than watches programs like this, you know, how do we say, look, Israel has a history in this land that they're in now. They didn't just pop up and the Palestinians get upset. You know, they didn't even exist. They didn't even have a coinage. They didn't have a dynasty or whatever, you know. And we know Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran just hate the Jews. Can I ask you, I know it's been a little bit off the record, but you know, how do you deal with people's ignorance about that when they're just knowing that these terrorist groups actually don't give a toot about a two-state solution? No. They just want to kill Israel and the Jews wherever they are.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah, well, it's a two-part question, and I'll double back a little bit.
Thank you.
The reason why I think this is important is that it gives some evidence for the biblical text. It's very easy to simply make it a work of fiction. It's no different than Robin Hood or something. And so when you have an uneducated public that looks at it as, you just invented this. You see, I've spent some time outside of Israel in the Middle East. I have friends in Saudi Arabia, I have friends in Jordan. And you need to appreciate from their perspective, and this is obviously very blinkered, but from their perspective, the idea of Israel is a colony from Europe. You see, they don't anything before the 20th century, it was the Ottoman Empire, and that was Muslim. And it dates back, way back to the Roman Empire. So it's always been, once Islam comes up, take out the Crusades, because that was another European invasion that eventually was repelled in their mind victoriously by the Muslims. Then you have this post-World War I fascination and fixation by Europe to find especially Britain, interestingly enough, with the Balfour Declaration. And then also the declaration made at San Remo in Italy in 1920, saying the United Nations gets together, it says we need to make a homeland, and so on and so forth. Well, to the surrounding nations, they see Israel as an attempt by Europe to once again colonize their land. Now, they wipe out all history before that, of course. And so what we hope to do is, you can't, prejudice is something that you can't change just with education. It's a predisposition that a person has. And so what
let me ask you that question there. Where does that predisposition happen? Does it happen at birth?
Well, if you listen, there's a company in Israel called Palestinian Media Watch.
Yes.
And they focus just on what does the Palestinians tell themselves, not the rest of the world.
Right.
And they're very good at pointing out the fact that from the cradle, these young Muslim-raised children are being told that it's their duty and honor to eventually kick Israel out of the land. And this is a European stalking horse to barge in. But part of it comes down also to an expectation because of vocabulary. You see, even in our conversation here, we talk about Israelis and Palestinians. Well, it didn't always that definition didn't exist. When Israel became a nation before the United Nations, anyone born in that land was called a Palestinian. You know, whether Jewish or Muslim or secular, you had a Palestinian passport. And so what happened when Yasser Arafat created the Palestine Liberation Organization, he sort of hijacked that term Palestinian, when in fact what we have in Israel today is we have Israelis and Jordanians. You realize most of the Muslims, if they don't want to take an Israeli passport, they can take a Jordanian passport. which is strange when you consider at the end of the Six-Day War, those that were called refugees fled to Jordan. Jordan kicked them out.
Yeah.
They want nothing.
Why?
Why? They don't want nothing to do with them because the truth of the matter is, you know, if you want to see peace in Israel, and we know biblically it'll never come until the Prince of Peace sits on the throne of David. But if you want to see the peace in Israel, removing Israel won't stop all the infighting. We see that up in Syria, in Iran, Iraq, and everywhere. We see all of that sorts of stuff. So I think it's a predisposition. I think it's also satanic. It's a scary thing to say, but because it's irrational.
Yeah.
It's completely irrational and non-historic. Here's what's interesting. I've talked to my Muslim friends in Saudi Arabia, especially the one that took us out and drove us around in the desert. I said to him, "Do you believe in Moses?" "Yes." "Who is he?" "Well, he's a prophet of Allah." "So he's a real person then?" "Yes." "And did he bring the children of Israel out of Egypt?" "Yes." Because the Quran says he did. And then you have all the prophets. These are all, I said, so these are real people. According to you, they're mislabeled, but they're real people. Because you're told to hate the Jews. Why? Because they didn't keep the law of Moses. Well, who gave the law to Moses?
Yeah.
Right? Was it Allah or was it Yahweh? And the point of the matter is they have to, even within their own religious context, they have to have Israel and the people of Israel as something that's historic because their very Quran makes reference to them.
Of course.
And why is he making reference to a people that you're to kick out if they're not legitimate? Correctly. Yeah. Exactly right. Exactly right.
No, I'm glad you've dealt with this because this is something that needs to be spelt out in every form and which way possible because of the situation in Israel at the moment.
Yes. Yes.
But Ron, I would actually say that you've got a little promo as well, which we can show.
Okay.
Would you actually like to introduce that?
Okay. Good.
The establishment of the nation of Israel begins with their exodus from Egypt. And so in this study, we're going to be looking at the question of the evidence for the exodus.
All right.
So just to remind our viewers so they can get in touch with you, how can they do that? And a little bit about why you're here in the UK, because normally are you resident now in the States?
Yes, we spent 10 years in New Zealand, and now we live in Florida, right in the eye of the hurricane that's hammering down on us. But
whereabouts in Florida?
At Cocoa, right opposite the Space Center. So we watch
on the other side,
on the eastern side. But yeah, and the two presentations I'm making this Saturday and this Sunday. Saturday it's in Bath. If you go to our site, you can see it and you can register for it. You need to register so that we know you're coming. Or in Maidstone on Sunday, we're doing their Sunday morning service, taking a break for lunch, and then coming back and doing the second part of the presentation. It's about a 3-hour presentation with all the videos and slides and stuff like that. So if they want to do that, if not, just simply go to archaeos.org and they can see all our materials.
Yeah, and that's at khouse.org.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Email that's coming from Brian. He's talking about Melchizedek. It says, it's very interesting to me in what Ron Matsen said about the pillar that was discovered east of the city of David, due south times 30 miles from Bethel, which has a longitude of 35 degrees. And as in Daniel 12:12, Jesus' life for those that are blessed by him was predicted as being 1,335 days. Matching the numbers of the measurements of the Ark of Noah. Jesus' life, death and resurrection was 33.5 years. The distance between the rock and the pillar was 30 miles from Bethel. God's house, i.e. 30 plus 35 of longitude, or 335 or 30 years, plus the remaining 3.5 years reflected Jesus' ministry on the earth. Many thanks. Shalom from Brian.
I'm Brian.
Goodness, Brian.
Brian, you're good with your math. I'll tell you, I have to check it out. Yeah. Send it to us at chaos.org. But yeah, you know, here's the thing that I love, and we have a lot more things like this, by the way. Not just find a site, but there are some very peculiar aspects of it. Because see, when God does something, he does something in a way that no one can explain. And I like to find that, and I like to leave the mystery associated with it. That's why that one little thing, I call that God's meridian. You know, here we have GMT is here in London, right? At Greenwich Mean. And I like to point, after I've done this, these 3 points lining up, I said, perhaps that's the meridian line we should be using to measure the rest of the world, is the split rock and Jerusalem and Bethel.
Yeah, fascinating. Anyway, thanks very much, Brian. And also for you at home, remember to get in touch with Ron Matsen's organization, khouse.org, okay? Okay, well, where do you want to go from here for the remainder of the time?
Well, we can just talk about the sense of the ministry of Chuck Missler. And he had a huge impact on a lot of people around the world. And like I said, going back to the beginning of the program, Revelation TV was a real key partner in that we were primarily an audio ministry. It was just audio tapes, CDs, and then published commentaries. There was videos, but they were just VHS tapes. And that was sort of seen as an end-of-line product because there wasn't a vision for television because we were a small ministry and still are a small ministry. But when you came along and said, hey, I'd like to get some of that stuff on Revelation TV, that then sort of put a boot up our backside that says, let's try to do that. And between you and Leslie, we began to supply stuff, Revelation, Learn the Bible in 24 Hours, Genesis, so on and so forth. And what that did was then that sort of kickstarted the sense. And now we have a YouTube channel called Koinonia House. It has 250,000 subscribers to it alone. My goodness. And that most of that came as a result of us saying, well, we've done those videos, let's do some more, let's do some more. And we're still capturing material that he has done, the teachings I've done. Both Chuck and I have taught verse by verse, chapter by chapter through the entire Bible. So as a ministry, we're still carrying on all that sorts of things, plus doing a lot of things in areas of Israel and substantiating the Bible from the proof that we can get from the evidence that's there.
Right. Something that just comes to mind, and you might be able to help here. Under the Temple Mount area, which is in the hands of the Muslims, you know, the Dome of the Rock, Alaska Mosque and everything, the story goes, and they teach their children, Palestinian children, that there is no evidence at all underneath in Mount Moriah or Zion for the Jewish temple of ever existing. I mean, how ridiculous you can get. But what would you say with regards to that?
Well, first I'll give you a statement about Jerusalem, and this is from the chief archaeologist for the whole of Israel. Jerusalem is the most difficult place on the planet to do archaeology, because normally what you have is you have an ancient site, a city gets destroyed, they cover it, they build another city, it gets destroyed, and they go on up, like when you're there at Megiddo, 21 different cities
Yes.
have been there.
And all the earthquakes that happened in between.
Just everything. So it's all, well, Jerusalem, you see, is a place that has been not just captured, but destroyed and plowed. Twice the Romans have come in and just put it to nothing. And so it's a lot of stuff's mixed up. Now, when you come to the Temple Mount issue, Koinonia House for almost 10 years were responsible for sponsoring the temple conferences, and we would invite in different people that had different perspectives, because there are plus and minuses for everything there. Is there evidence for the temple in Jerusalem? The answer is yes, but it's not convincing, because with each conjecture, and there's at least 5 conjectures for where the temple could have been.
Yeah, you mean the exact place, but it's
Exactly.
obviously there
The area,
somewhere.
and what interestingly enough, the most important discoveries being made now associated with the temple are in the city of David. This is where they're finding,
Which is on the east side.
which is on the south side.
Oh, is it? Southeast.
You got the steps down.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, the steps down, that go down into the beginning, and then
Yeah.
there's the road, and you go across the street
Right,
to where the
okay.
visitor center
Yep.
is. And in there, for example, they have found artifacts,
Coinage.
bulas. That's the stamp that would have been used
Yep.
by high priests, and the gold bell that was found by Eli Shukran, that they suspect that it came off the garment of the high priest, and all that's taking place in the dig to the south of the Temple Mount.
Yeah.
And
But that's Mount Moriah, which goes back to the early days,
Correct.
you know,
Correct.
Especially where
Yeah.
Abraham offered up his son Isaac, which is ironic, you know,
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah,
I mean,
well,
it's
there
all,
you go.
you know. But just to say, I mean, one of my great uncles, Claude Rainier Conder, he was a colonel in the British Army, and he's found different parts of the temple underneath, and it's even when you go quite deep underneath that particular wall
Yes.
that's existing.
Yeah.
There's quite a lot of evidence that goes back to the temple, the Herod's temple. you know.
correct. And it's been there was sort of shortly after the city of Jerusalem was liberated by the British. There was an ability to get in there and look at some of that stuff.
Yeah, we could go on for hours as well, but it's really good to have had you on the program tonight. I just want to say thank you for giving us time tonight. We're going to be adding a bit of footage and flesh to the bones, as it were, to this. But I want to thank Ron and yourself and Nathan and the team of 3 that were here tonight. But I have to say, what we need is more evidence so that we can help people who don't have quite enough faith that the Bible is reliable, and we've got the evidence to prove it. Stay tuned to Revelation TV. God bless you. Thank you.